Well, I have a microphone, and you don't.
So you will listen to every damn word I have to say!
Welcome to the You, Me, and the Scene podcast, brought to you by Revival Recordings. Welcome back to You, Me, and the Scene podcast, brought to you by Revival Recordings. We are now on episode 11.
Hey, Editing Thrill House here. It's episode 12, but it's fine.
And this week it's just me and Hayley, and we're going to go over some quick updates in the Revival world, and then we're going to be joined by Leaf, and they are a prevention educator at Our Music, My Body, which Revival, you might have seen on our socials, has partnered with a couple times throughout the past year and a half. And they are a campaign that focuses on sexual violence prevention in the music scene and spreading awareness. So very important topic. We'll say if, little trigger warning, if these conversations, are not something you are interested in listening to, that's okay. It's understandable, and we'll see you in the next episode. But if you want to kind of take a listen into what the campaign does, what we would like to see happen in the music scene, and kind of what steps all of us as fans, artists, label can all be taking to help go in the right direction, take a listen. So I think first thing is, when this episode comes out, Gold Steps would have dropped their cover of, what'd you say it was?
It's One Last Breath by Creed. It will have been released on June 30th, right before they played Summerfest, I believe, in front of Flyleaf. So that's exciting. Yeah. If you haven't gotten a chance, please go listen to it. They did a fantastic job on the cover. And it'll be part of our It's All Grunge Volume 2 that will hopefully take place later this year or next year.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you haven't checked out Volume 1, which why haven't you? Because we talked about it already on previous episodes.
For sure.
Go check it out. Like, our bands did some really cool covers. They all came out great. So
I thought so.
So you can check out Gold Leafs. You said Flyleaf. You said Flyleaf. Gold Steps cover. They're just gonna make a mega band. They're gonna combine them.
Yeah. The Summerfest went so well that they are now Gold Leaf.
And the other thing is, if you haven't gotten your tickets to I Set to Kill's 15th anniversary tour for their first album, was that Reach? Yes.
Reach, yep.
Okay, yes. And that, there's six dates, maybe?
5 or 6.
5 or 6. The Arizona area, California, there's Texas. I think those are the 3 states we're going through.
Yeah.
And yes, Arizona, California, and Texas. We know what we're talking about.
Look
sometimes.
Look at us.
Look at us go. They're going to be going on tour, and on the 14th is when they start. So if you haven't grabbed your tickets for those, get them and get to a show, because they haven't played these songs in a very long time. So if you've been a fan since the beginning, this was pre-revival time. This was when all the original band members were there. So
yeah,
should be a good time.
Yeah, should be exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was it for revival stuff. I know in terms of the scene, we're recording this on May 30th. So very ahead of time for when you guys are going to be hearing it. Like we said in other episodes, we were kind of getting a lot of recording done for Amanda to go out on tour for a little bit and leave us. And by the time this one comes out, she'll be back. So maybe we'll have some good tour stories when we get back into recording. Horror stories. And so the news is Boys Like Girls. I mean, we talked about how they had a new single on a previous episode, but they announced their tour, and like we had,
they have a lot of good people on the tour with them as well.
Yeah. I hate nothing more though when those tours. There was like a meme that like retweeted or whatever the other day, and it was like, a tour is gonna be like so messy when the ad mat looks like this, and it's all the like little arrow up asterisks, like because
I felt like I was looking at it on my phone when I first saw it, and I was like trying to like zoom in. I'm like, who is on this section?
I know,
because it's like it all melds together.
Not tell.
Yeah, I know,
because it was small on Instagram, so I'm like, who is? Literally, it was like, who is in Boston?
I think the one that's in Raleigh. I think it's actually potentially the last stop of that tour. I believe State Champs. I think is on everything.
Oh, that would be awesome.
But
State Champs is
the
fun
Somerset is also going to be on the Raleigh date, which is exciting. I love the Somerset.
That's a good lineup. Right?
I know. I really like the Somerset and State Champs. Yeah. I really don't know a ton of Boys Like Girls. I'd have to go like back into the archives and like really listen.
Yeah. Well, they'll have their new album out that they're touring for this, so you'll be able to get onto the new music.
Yeah. I also saw that for those that like kind of like the older rock stuff, I saw that Chevelle announced a co-headlining tour with 3 Days Grace.
Yeah, I did see that.
That's happening. When was that? Is it in October? I think it's October. And that'll be interesting. I've seen Chevelle live once at a festival and like once in like a smaller venue, and they're so good. They are so good.
Nice.
I know.
So I think the end of summer, fall is going to have a lot of good tours going on.
Yeah.
That I'm
I feel like I haven't seen like a ton like for the summer.
Yeah,
like
it's all in the
huge
fall.
Ones. It's all in the fall, which I mean, I like because it's cooler.
Yeah,
especially if they're outdoor. Like, oh, God, I'm gonna sweat to death.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll have a good fall. It'll be fun.
Yes,
lots of music going on. And that is going to be presented by Emo Night. So
not Chevelle, the other one.
Yeah. And Boys Like Girls tour is presented by Emo Night, which is exciting. I know 2 episodes ago we had Morgan and TJ on, and they were talking about upcoming announcements. So there you go. Now we know what one of them was. So excited for them on this new venture of tour stuff. So that's cool. So yeah. I'll probably go to that show, the Boys Like Girls one, and then there are a couple that I still need to get tickets for this summer. I still want to go to Yellow Card. I still want to go. Well, Pierce the Veil's in like 2 weeks, but it's up in Maine. They didn't have a Boston date. Maine is the closest, so I don't know if I'm gonna make the trek up there. But I really wanted to see them.
My dad was asking me on this topic. Was asking me the other day about why do bands skip like these places, like other places when they're touring, and I'm like, sometimes they have no say. It just is like they're booking agents and stuff, and they hit the targets and things like that. So sometimes they have no say. You know, some people when they come to North Carolina, they either choose Charlotte, Raleigh, or Greensboro, and not the multiple ones. Obviously, Alistana is hitting Cat's Cradle in Chapel Hill, and then Jacksonville, I believe, is the next tour. So they have a couple of North Carolina, South Carolina stops, but normally that's not the case.
Yeah. I think that's another thing. Later on in the episode, we talk about kind of things that fans who don't know anything about the industry, things they don't understand. We should have an episode like that. Like, we're gonna give you perspective on why
we should just
hit these stops.
Yeah. We should just have an episode where we let fans ask us questions, like a Q&A about what they're curious about in the music industry, and then we just answer them.
Like, why are you not coming to my city? Well, because the market is not there.
Right.
So, you know, like,
we don't want to be mean, but
yeah, like, we know you're a big fan and your friends probably are, but the rest of your city, no.
Sucks.
But we should do that's gonna be a episode topic, because I feel like we could definitely give you a little insight on things that probably aggravate you, but like have logical explanations behind them.
Right. Right.
Yes. But yeah, so that will be a future episode. Look out for it, guys. Drop us some questions. But yeah, so those are just a few updates. I mean, we're recording it so far ahead that I'm sure by the time this actually comes out,
there'll be more.
There'll be other stuff coming out that we'll talk about on socials instead of on this episode. So, but and we will be right back. We're going to be joined by Leaf, and I think it was a great conversation. I think there's a lot of important things that we talked about, but again, just a little warning: if the topics of sexual assault trigger you, it's okay. You can skip this episode, and we will see you next time we're on. And so we will be right back. Hello, and welcome back to the You, Me, and the Scene podcast. We are being joined by Leaf, who works for Our Music, My Body, which is a campaign that Revival has done some work with over the past year and a half, and, very happy with the work that they do, showing awareness of sexual violence in the music scene, which I think in our genre specifically, we have a lot going on consistently. So it's good to talk about and, have these conversations that are really important for everybody, fans, artists, us on the label side, to be aware of what's going on. So I'm going to have Leaf tell us a little bit about the campaign of Our Music, My Body, and we can go from there. A little rundown of, what you guys do over there and everything else.
Cool. So my specific role is a prevention educator, and so I do other things outside of Our Music, My Body, but our campaign is to help spread awareness about gender-based violence and sexual violence in the music industry, and we also train venues in creating effective policies that center survivors and how to handle situations that arise just being a venue owner, event runner. This year, recently, we decided that we're going to do some harm reduction supplies as well at our festivals that allow it, and provide some Narcan and education around drug harm reduction too.
Awesome. Yeah, so we started working with the campaign because I had met Maggie, who was the founder, correct, right, of the whole campaign, I believe, at Riot Fest back a year and a half ago, and we got talking, and I really liked what I was seeing, what the campaign was doing, and they are based out of Chicago, so it was more just in that area. That's where Riot Fest is, and so I thought from our side, we have bands, in Canada, we have ones down in Florida, North Carolina, all over, so to spread that and help, guide the campaign a little bit outwards from just the Chicago area. So we've talked with our bands, and you guys might have previously seen Nina, who used to have the position that Leaf now has, talk to some of our bands on Instagram and have these conversations. So I want to jump into the process and training aspects of like what you guys do with the venues, because I think that is like so great.
Yeah, totally. So people reach out to us all the time. We do trainings for people all over the country. I did one last week for dancing communities in the UK. And what originally was the training was about bystander intervention, which is just, if you see something, say something, trying to talk about the ways which we approach offenders or things that we're watching happen at events. And when I talked to this last group of people, I realized that there was a lot of components missing in some trainings about follow through and talking to offenders. So a lot of the trainings that I'm hoping to do moving forward, especially taking and learning so much from the people previous to me, but also developing more ways in which we can talk to venues about developing policy and like follow through and aftercare and follow ups. It's not enough to just say that you did something in that moment. We have to really be centering survivors in the way that we also build community around these events, because we're not just, the music industry is not just a business, it's a community.
For sure. So what would some of that look like? Like if there was someone accused of something, would that follow-up be like that person's banned from the venue, or, what kind of steps after that initial intervention?
Yeah, I think that we have a lot of ideas as different communities in the music industry around kind of what follow up can look like. And I think that in different cultures and different venues, that might look different. I think the important things is like, one, addressing your own biases when trying to develop those policies and like approaching different situations. The second step to that is to make sure that there's capacity for certain follow up. I don't personally recommend venues ban people without some sort of follow up, because the thing is that you ban somebody from one space, they will just go to another space. And that's not to say that survivors should have to coexist in certain spaces, but that the priority should be that there is some sort of transformation of offenders' behaviors, and that venues event owners, and bands all share a part of the community with offenders, if they're attending your show or if they're a fan of yours, or if they're in a band.
Yeah. Which you never know. I think like the broader discussion of all of this, because like we as fans or being in the audience, we try. I know I try and like be aware of the surroundings and what's going on. I think a lot of us do, and you see a lot of bands now speak up from their view from the stage, but this expands, like, it's not just fan based behavior. The bands can also be guilty of behavior.
Totally. I mean, and a lot of musicians have been guilty. And using their power of being on stage to influence people. But again, there's different actions. I've tried to lay out different actions for different people on like what is a call in versus a call out, and when are those used, and like when it's appropriate, or different types of phrases you can use to approach an offender. I think one big thing is trying to meet people where they're at. Sometimes people don't really understand that you have to ask for consent before dancing with someone. And like little things like that, which might be like they thought that it was right, and then you could correct them and easily they change their behavior, versus people who maybe are just knowing that they're offenders and doing repeat offenses despite being talked to or trying to be held accountable. And so those are two different situations, right? So we have all these tools of like how to deal with different types of offenders and how to develop those as venues. We had a great discussion with our UK one, where after the presentation we just kind of went around and discussed different things that we were approached with as event runners. And I thought that is the most important part, really, is that conversation of understanding what happened and kind of thinking about, okay, what did the survivors say that they wanted, and where could I have followed through with those things. So yeah, and that's the most important part to me, is not even just the training, but the conversation afterwards.
Yeah, no, that's I always think of it like that's an important conversation, because you don't want to escalate a situation, especially when you're in a venue. If security gets involved, everything else, it can just get very volatile, or someone can react volatile. But I think like there's a very clear like consent of sexual violence, and then there's those areas, like you said, like dancing with someone, where it's like some people see that need a learning curve for that because they're not aware. Like, you can't just go up behind someone and, you know, touch them type of stuff. So, like, correcting those and seeing how it goes from there, because I think especially venue staff, you need to have a very good balance before it goes and like turns into a situation that just like, if you're trying to stop someone from doing something. So I think that's an important point that you guys touch on, for sure.
Yeah, I think there's also the recognition that sexual education is a privilege in this country. So a lot of people's sexual education is maybe media that represents rape culture more than it does consent culture. So there's that too. And yeah, having staff informed of like kind of how to deal with certain situations with that sensitivity in mind is super important.
Yeah, because so you start as the prevention educator, so that's kind of that is initially your job, is to start before anything happens, like to get in there and be like, here we are. So I know, like, obviously this focuses, our Music My Body focuses in the music scene in particular. And I know, like, might be more of a question for like Maggie, who, you know, came up with this concept. But why for you is it important to focus on the music scene and sexual violence within this like subgroup?
Again, I have been a part of the DIY community for most of my life. I've been an artist myself and a musician myself, and I've performed. So these are people that I've shared community with. I so there's that aspect of it, just me being a part of the community, and also so much of artists are marginalized people. So many of the people I've met in the music industry have been sexually assaulted or experienced sexual violence. I think that, you know, at music shows there is a lot of sexual violence that happens, and there's a lot of crossover too with drug facilitated assault or people who are using drugs that get assaulted. So I think it's important to have that space for artists. Art is such a important thing for marginalized people, for survivors to cope, and we should be able to exist in that space, take up space in the music industry and the art industry. And you know, a lot of people a lot of musicians, a lot of event owners, they don't want to think about, you know, identity politics maybe, or, you know, these things. They're tough subjects for people who don't experience that, but then they don't realize that there's so many people in the room who didn't have a choice but to think about those things.
For sure. I know, I think like the focus on the music industry, because it's just, I remember did you guys watch the Netflix documentary on Woodstock? Was it Trainwreck?
No.
Came out last year, I believe. And so it's all about Woodstock, but Woodstock like 99, and how like the riot, like how it was just a mess. And there was, you know, footage on there of sexual assaults happening. And so it's hard, like, you know, for us to see that happening, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and still having those issues at festivals right now. And, you know, I think it's important to start, I mean, should have started way before this, to start intervening and like be like, we need to be active and like, or proactive about this. So I had a thought and it kind of went out of my head, but where I was going with it, but that kind of just reminded me of it. Cause it was like that documentary, there was very clear footage of documented incidences, and the, you know, festival creators trying to sweep it under the rug as well.
Right.
So it's like, you know, although the cameramen that were, you know, documenting back then caught this footage and everything else, it's also up to the higher up people, not just the fans in the audience. So obviously in the pop punk, you know, rock scene, we can all think off the top of our head many bands that just come to mind when we're discussing this topic. So there's always the argument of separating the art and the artist.
I saw that question in your email, and immediately I was just like, I had struggled with that question for a long time, and then but like for some reason this moment triggered it for me. But every musician that I had seen get called out for some sort of sexual abuse, they're talking about it in their music. So how, like, you can't separate it, and you can't separate it because you need to support survivors. You can't separate it because it's from the perspective of an offender. This art is from that perspective, and they're talking about it. They're singing about it. There's so many musicians where they're just straight up singing about what they do to women, and we were all fine with that until they got called out.
Yeah. I think it's hard also, like, especially if you're someone who, like, grew up going to this band's shows, like, as you're younger and continued going to them, and then all of a sudden they get called out, and it's like, oh, all those memories I had, those friends I made at those shows, those songs that meant so much. It's like, damn, it's like kind of like a little breakup. Like, you're like, damn, I have to separate myself from this band now that meant so much to me. And now I have to, like, it is like a little grieving process, I feel like, totally. At least for me, where it's like I had these bands that were very important to me, and like especially some of them on the level that their offenses were, and you're like, but you gotta like make that cut. You gotta cut it off at some point and like be like, all right, I'm not gonna support this. If they're dropping a new album, so be it. I'm not gonna care about it. Like, because you can still have the memories and the good times of like those shows and all that, but it's, you know, a line, I think, at least for me. I know some people feel very differently, and that is like a very hot topic for people to say, like, separate the two. But for me personally, what about you, Hayley?
Yeah, it does definitely feel like all a little tainted.
Yeah, I've had some conversations with some people where let's say, for example, there's a lead singer that's been called out for something, and I'm not saying they're called out for, you know, XYZ 20,000 times. Say it's one allegation and it's the lead singer, and the band has made a statement that they're dealing with it and stuff like that. I've had, you know, conversations with people saying, you know, well, what if the band members didn't know about it and now they're knowing about it? And if you stop listening to that music, then you're also hurting those other band members. That's their income based off of something their lead singer did that they didn't even know about. And I think that sometimes that can be the hard line, like Courtney was talking about. Like, you just don't know. But also, it's that line of like,
it's really hard for me to believe that their bandmates don't know.
Right.
I was gonna say, when you're touring together and that close, it is hard. I mean, they can claim it all they want, but
right.
And we would never personally know, but we also know what touring looks like. So
right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, you're having sex right next to each other.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, sorry, but that's what it is.
You're not wrong.
But I just, yeah, and then, I mean, also, here's the other thing is, like, we talk a lot now at Resilience, and I don't know that this has been, this is restorative and transformative justice are ideas that have existed for a long time, but I think only maybe more recently have been reaching nonprofits like ours, and thinking about the process of, you know, transforming offender behavior so that they don't repeat offend is super important. But I think that only really happens when their bandmates admit, like, yeah, this was happening, and I'm going to help support them to get better from it because I was too weak to say something beforehand. And I've seen that happen with bandmates before, and that's the only time that I can really be like, okay, I'll keep listening to your music. You know, as long as I'm not triggered by it, you know. But I do think there is a really important response from bandmates, and pretending like you didn't know is not it.
Right. What do you say to those fans that, like, let's say you're talking to someone about this specific topic of the artists being separated from their music? What do you say to the fans that maybe come up to talk about it and they say, well, there's not been any charges. It's just kind of like allegations at this point. What would you say to them about, like, not listening to this music based off of just that it's just allegations? They're not charged with anything. They're not, they're innocent until proven guilty.
You know, there's never been a celebrity case of that, like, as far as like musicians, like big time musicians, where I'm like, first of all, like, that conversation doesn't even interest me enough, because what are you going to do about it? Whether you're going to go out there and prove it yourself. Right. But but also the criminal justice system has always failed survivors, and we know that. And so, and usually people who are defending celebrities also know that, and they're just making an excuse for this particular person or whatever. And so I really, try and get on people's, meet them where they're at on their perspective on that, because why is it this person gets a pass from you in terms of allegations versus like actual criminal charges? And I was a policy advocate for a long time, and I'm down to sit there and talk to somebody about policy too. Like, what does that even actually mean, charging somebody criminally, and is that even the goal for survivors to want that? If somebody was accused of being a sexual offender, that doesn't mean that survivor even wants to go and pursue a court case for it. But there are people in the more local music scene where allegations may have been thrown around and people don't believe other people. And my thought behind that is that I don't really care what people want to believe or not if they're not involved in the actual process of supporting that survivor. So I'm not going to waste my time in those conversations most of the time. But if they are somehow involved in supporting that survivor, or if there's some ongoing conflict between that person, like, I've set up mediations between people to be able to learn from each other, and to really understand what it means to not be believed. And especially, it's so important to believe somebody right off the bat, because it lowers the chances of PTSD being a lifelong sentence for somebody if they're validated immediately.
Yeah.
When you're speaking to these, like, survivors or people that are coming forward with these allegations, do you think, or have they said, like, they're coming forward as part of their healing and just wanting to make people aware of this other person, this offender? Or is there other reasons that they're coming forward with these, like, allegations?
I don't really try and guess the intentions of people more than I try and ask it. I just ask survivors, what exactly do you want from this situation? Right. And then is that something that I'm personally capable of? And I try and teach other people to do that too. You come up with a list of options you're willing to sacrifice and put in the capacity for to support somebody. And don't make promises you can't keep. So when I'm talking to a survivor, it's not about their intentions or how they specifically went about it, but for me, it's then, okay, where do we go from here? Is your intention to deplatform this person completely? And then also, why? Is that part of why they were offending? Most of the time, survivors that have come to me aren't really interested in deplatforming the people they're accusing, and more so just wanting their friends to really acknowledge what was happening and talk to this person directly about it.
Yeah, I think that can tie into, like, the idea of, like, deplatforming. You can also tie into, like, the keyboard warriors that go very hard if any allegation comes up, to try and bring a band down, because it's like, even if there's a whisper of one, we've seen it on Twitter and stuff like that, it will immediately take off and just like they want that person to have everything taken away from them without even knowing like facts at that point sometimes. So I think it's important to listen to what like the survivor wants out of that, not just like take it as your own and be like, all right, well, I want this. It's like, you know, you kind of, because it's not about like anybody else, it's about them. Like, so
yeah, I just from my background have researched a lot of you know, anti-trafficking and anti-rape movements. One of the things that I recently listened to a podcast about, this is like somewhat relevant, satanic panic and how it criminalized like metalheads. And they were like, there was people that were arrested for murder and rape just for listening to metal. And there was this episode on this podcast where they were talked about this fake sexual assault case that blew up because it was like so much about like Satan, and it was so much about you know, metal. But then the kind of point that they drove home was that it was basically other people, like parents of teenagers and kids, coaching them what to say to police officers and to doctors and to psychiatrists. And the whole time, if you just believed a survivor, a lot of these kids were saying that they weren't molested by a Satanist, and that there was no metalhead that made them sacrifice a goat, so if we only believe survivors, then there, one probably would be less crazy fake allegations like that. Also believing survivors in the next step, so that there's not this huge like pushback against cancel culture and like woke culture, like.
Yep.
And I think another reason why people want to do that is because they want to separate themselves so much from sexual violence culture. Like they want to believe that they are so far away from it that they will make up, huge big ideas or conspiracies, or people to just hate and think that they're like an all bad or all evil person, just so they can be like, well, I'm one of the good ones. I'm not a part of that. When the reality is that we were all raised and groomed into rape and pedophile culture. So there's things that we all had to unlearn, and there's not a single person I've ever met that didn't have some sort of like gray area of consent throughout their life. We are all a part of that.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think that.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of went all over the place.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, like the culture of it and growing up, like, I mean, you have people blame everything on, culture, or like a lot of things get blamed on music and metal and video games. You can point to so many things, but at the end of the day, it's like, I think we have to also remember it's on that person. It's like you can sit there and say like, oh, Marilyn Manson like is accused of all these things because of his music and his beliefs, and it's like, no, he's just a shitty person. But,
right, exactly. Like it's not some big cult that he's a part of. He's just a rapist. But,
so it's like not everybody that listens to or had listened to him. I've never been a Marilyn Manson fan, but is like can be blamed for his actions just because they're in that genre. But the point you made, like, we kind of all at some point have that gray area, and I think that's kind of also when we're like talking about like, do you separate the art from the artist, and like that kind of, as we were talking about that, I was thinking like of the spectrum of things, because you were saying like, oh, dancing with someone without their consent obviously is a lot different than a full like sexual assault rape at an event, like, and I think we understand that, and we know the moral high ground of what's like, that's still wrong. You need to ask for consent to dance with someone, but kind of that. So we all have those areas that are like, we want to be able to justify things like, oh, well, it's just dancing. But it's like, no, you still need to, now that like we were conditioned that was like fine. And now we need to like unlearn it for ourselves.
Right.
And, like,
there's also this huge component, I think, that back in the day, anyone who wasn't like a straight cis man could not be super direct and forward with their communication about consent and sexual interactions. Yeah. So there is this, again, this huge part, it's not just rape culture. I mean, that is rape culture, but it also is the patriarchy. It is also white supremacy, and why that a lot of like our sexual interactions had to be coded for so long too. And kind of recognizing your power in that too. You know, like it's not just like somebody might not know not to dance with somebody, but also recognizing like somebody might feel really uncomfortable if you ask to dance with them anyway because you're, you know, of this identity or you came from this kind of power in this space. Yeah, I don't know. And so there's also a lot of people who maybe they're not asking to dance, and then somebody is not going to say no to it because they don't feel like the safety to be able to say no or directly communicate about their own autonomy.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, trying to segue now. Like, I mean, I as a female, I'm straight, but as a female, I understand that completely. So it's like, I think we can all, the three of us sitting here, can understand that. Leaf is non-binary, correct? You use they, them. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. And me and Hayley are, you know, straight females, but we, as being in those like categories that we are, and understanding from, you know, I don't know how old are you, Leaf?
I'm 30.
Okay, so yes, we're all the same age. And so like just understand growing up, like being scared to like say no sometimes, or feeling awkward to say it, or like what the reaction will be like, or like, you know. So it's always fun being us. All the straight men out there, it's real fun being us. And then so I think that also can kind of go into one of the other topics I wanted to talk about, was how we can hold like people accountable. Because like, so we have, you know, those people that are keyboard warriors and want to deplatform, and that's how they think they hold people accountable. But at the end of the day, it's like, that's not always gonna work. You still have people that are gonna go listen to the music, and especially if they're huge bands or musicians, they're still gonna make their money, and they're still gonna play their shows, and it's very hard to take that away from someone. I think bands, especially if someone in the band has been accused, we've seen multiple different avenues that the band takes. Like, there's been replacements of band members, there's been fully just ignoring what's going on, and then there's been like going on the defense. So I think, you know, obviously replacing a band member holds them accountable. From our view. From our label view, we have had discussions where we have a zero tolerance policy for our bands and how we would go about handling that. But you know, so I think just talking about how else can we hold them accountable that makes sense and actually makes an impact.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways, again, to hold somebody accountable, and also, again, different degrees of harm. It's also difficult because when I'm talking about inner community and people that we like personally know or are personally at our events or with our venues, it's going to be different than, again, these keyboard warriors who are going to talk about bigger name bands, bigger labels, or you know, celebrities that are pretty much untouchable at this point because of how much money they make. You know, so it's like that's a huge factor, is money specifically. You know, offenders are going to have a certain amount of power with a certain amount of money, with a certain label behind them. So again, for different people, accountability is going to look like different things. I think the zero tolerance from your side makes sense. I think that for smaller bands that are maybe not on labels but are playing the similar venues and sharing community with people, um, if they're not making a whole lot of money, they don't have a lot of power as a band. So to me, it's less important that they're um, not playing shows than it is to, again, encourage the bandmates to be open and honest about this behavior and checking their bandmate on this behavior when they go to the next show. But at the same time, there is certain behavior where it's just like, you should just not be in a space until, you fully reconstruct your ideas of other people's bodies and how entitled you feel to them. But yeah, so I don't know. It looks different for different communities, I think. But the biggest thing is just directly talking about it and acknowledging that it happened.
Yeah. I think one of the things we see a lot, I know, especially recently, I can name a few instances, are people trying to also hold opening bands accountable for another band's actions. And I know we've had discussions about this, Hayley and like us on the label, of kind of fans not understanding touring and like the opportunity of these smaller bands, which is like the line that they have to decide whether they still want to be on that tour or drop it. But do they drop it and lose that opportunity to play all those bigger stages?
Totally.
And so it's a difficult, I think it's like a difficult concept for people that are not in this industry and don't understand the logistics of everything to kind of wrap their head around, like, well, just drop out of the tour. It's like, it's a lot that smaller band is losing.
Yeah.
And obviously we have the spectrum of like the amount of harm done. I know like that we can put into question of like these bands. If it was something horrific, I would expect bands to be like, yeah, I don't want to tour with them. But it's like there's a lot for these smaller bands to lose on their end in these situations.
Yeah, and I have a really good friend who is in a local band called Blacker Face, and I first met them by them playing a show at my DIY house that I had just moved into, and during the set started talking about how racist the people running the venue was, and I was like, oh, that's nuts. I didn't hear anything about that. It was like my first show that I was running there. I had just moved in 2 nights before, and it sparked a ton of conversations about how our house was very a white feminist space and how we needed to grow from that. I personally just separated myself from that specific house altogether down the line, but when I thought about that moment a lot, I had multiple conversations with my friend, and they kind of talked about how important it is that when you are a marginalized person or maybe a smaller band or you have less money than the spaces that you're going to be able to take up, they're handing you a microphone. So you're able, like, and if, as long as it's, not going to compromise any more opportunity for you and like weighing those risks or whatever, being able to directly call out somebody while you're, playing with them might be a fun idea, or just even like hanging out with them and calling out their behavior directly while you're hanging out with the band that's, doing that. I personally don't see bands playing together as an endorsement of each other, but I do think that it's important that when I see bands interact, that they're calling each other's behavior out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's like I know before we got on this podcast episode with you, like when we were talking, we just like about how this can go and how we have to kind of be careful of certain topics and stuff. But like, I think people need to understand, like, this is also a business, so we always have to look at it from both angles when we're like approaching these situations. It's And sometimes it's hard. Like, sometimes it's like, that sucks, but there's people's jobs involved and money and like us paying, I mean, it doesn't really happen for Revival or a smaller label. And like I said, all the bands we work with are amazing. And but there is a lot of like aspects that go into these things. So when people are calling things out and just being like, everybody that's associated with this person needs to drop them right now, it's like, you kind of gotta let us figure out what we're doing too, like to act, like get to that point.
No, I mean, I think it's an important thing to talk about, because when we also kind of talk about what does it mean to like exile someone, and not that I think that banning somebody from a space or replacing somebody in a bandmate is exiling someone. So I want to make that very clear, because people have used this terminology of like, oh, you're exiling them by deplatforming them. That's not true. You really have to measure somebody's identity in spaces and be like, is this person going to survive without being in this band? If yes, then maybe they're not in the band anymore. If no, like, and this is literally their only income, then maybe it has to be thought about a little bit more. And that's not to like be on the side of offenders at all, but it's also to be like, a lot of people who don't have resources end up being sexual violence victims, and poverty is one factor in re-victimization of sexual assault victims also. So for me, it's like, how much punishment or like potential violence do you want to put somebody through before you're like, okay, I forgive you for the violence you did to me? It doesn't make sense to me, for one. For two, like, we got to consider people's identities. If I've definitely deplatformed people before, or tried to, and that was with knowing that they had other income avenues, that they would be able to succeed outside of more DIY spaces that were supposed to be meant for more marginalized and small time bands. These people could succeed outside of that. They didn't need to be a part of these communities and re-victimize people. So it really depends, one, on the situation, and two, kind of like, again, like, are you going to lose all your money and your whole label over saying something? And then how many survivors, a part of your label, are affected by that?
Any thoughts, Hayley? It's okay if you don't have any.
I'm just listening because, no, you're fine. I'm just listening because it's, Courtney, you've been kind of the one that's been talking to Our Music, My Body and things. And while I know about the campaign around it, because we've obviously been partnering and collabing with you guys in the past, it's interesting to hear. I don't think a lot of people know exactly how to broach the topic. Like you spoke about earlier, how some people are just uncomfortable with the topics and discussing them. And I think a lot of the time it's just about communication, being open to those conversations, and confronting maybe that uncomfortable zone in order to make the change, both in ourselves and as a whole.
And I think, like, I'm trying to like make it as candid as possible. And like I said, like, we had discussion of like, like, is there any topic that, is a little too much to talk about? And I feel like a lot of people wouldn't publicly like be like, oh, it is still a business, so like we have to look at it from that side. But it's like, we also have to have these conversations out loud and for people to understand, like, all of the angles and aspects that go into these like issues, because like, we can all agree that sexual violence is wrong. Like, that should be unanimous agreement, and we can all say that. But then you have to have these larger discussions that I think are important, to understand the full grasp of like, what else can we be doing? How can we help? How do we change our thought process and like, like we said, like, unlearn what we already knew, and like,
Yeah. And I feel like it can't be it's not affecting me, so it's not my problem. I feel like that can sometimes be an idea that people go into these things with. And in order for us all to create these safer spaces and to hold these people accountable for the offenses that they've done, it has to be our problem, everyone's problem, in order to make that change.
Yeah, definitely. I think also like that there's that idea, and then there's some of the fan base idea like we've talked about in previous episodes, not like related to like sexual violence, but just like some people's unwavering loyalty to like bands, like this band can do no wrong, or like anything else, and it's like you don't actually know these people. Like they can present themselves on social media, and you can go to their shows and you can meet them. I go, you don't actually personally know these people, so like being ride or die for them, you kind of got to step back every once in a while and be like, they could have done something wrong. They could have harmed someone. Like, you don't know.
Yeah.
You can't sit there and say they would never do that because you don't know them.
Right.
So as like fans, it's kind of like you gotta reel it in sometimes.
Yeah. I would even go further to say that everyone needs to recognize that we are all capable of harm, and recognizing systems of oppression and poverty are so important here, because the only reason why you have to prioritize business at all is so that people can eat, right? And so um, that sexual violence, ending it is not just with education, and it's not with just banning people from spaces, but it's also all these other systems of oppression that we all participate in and have to check ourselves on and be able to fight against, so that sexual violence decreases. Like, that's literally it, the money can very much silence a lot of people.
Yeah, and you see that with much like more famous people all the time. So
Right.
so I know like obviously over the past few years, and especially in 2020, we all saw the like Me Too movement, and it really, if you take a step back, focused on film and like actors and producers and stuff like that. And I don't think we got the same in the music scene, like attention to it as like film and TV did. Do you guys feel that? Because I kind of sit back and I'm like, well, there's a lot of musicians that are like high profile musicians that really should have gotten it at that time and did not get it.
Do you think the Me Too movement, do you think it made a huge impact in our scene, or do you think that it was kind of it started an impact that we're kind of working still towards?
Well, when I guess I should be super honest. When Me Too first happened, I was going through a lot, actually. I had this relationship with somebody that felt really icky, and we just had like an interaction that felt also like very gray area. This person was also a sexual violence survivor, as am I, and so like we had like a really complicated thing happen, and then we also were talking about our situations of like being like coexisting in spaces with our abusers and what that feels like. And then we got drunk together, and then the next morning, Me Too was a huge thing, and I just was so triggered by all these conversations and people kind of posting on social media being like, I stand with you. And I just felt so betrayed by that, because we were having all these talks, and our relationship at the time to sex and like romance was so messed up because of it. Then I outed multiple different rapists that I knew in like my local scene, and there's a lot of regret in some of that, because I didn't ask survivors before I went ahead and did it. I was just frustrated, and I do think that that had an impact, because I had run a space and I was running events. People knew my face, and then I at first didn't think anybody was gonna see my posts because I didn't feel like anything I was doing was that above ground, if that makes sense. Like a lot of the people I was talking to, we would be in somebody's living room with just a few other survivors, or I would do mediation in my bedroom, at my punk house. So I really didn't think that I had reached to more than like 5 people, and it ended up sparking a lot of conversations with a lot of different people. Other people were talking about specific musicians on their pages that I had called out and being like my interaction with them was also awful, and so then that started blowing up too. So I do think, and then other people were also coming out with their own stories right when that happened. So I do think that like for Chicago specifically, it did blow up, but at the same time, it does create this culture of like trying to cancel people, and cancel people not even for sexual violence. It will be such silly things, and it makes the movement feel so watered down, and not being able to have these conversations, and everyone kind of wants to be on the right side, so they're never the one that could have possibly committed anything like terrible, or let their bandmate like do harm or whatever. So it still felt very, on the one hand, I felt like that a lot of conversations were happening. A lot of survivors felt more comfortable in speaking up, and there was a lot of people that I was able to talk to and understand more around organizing. So it definitely changed my life in particular. But at the same time, there are these like neoliberal negative side effects, which have watered it down. So I don't know. There's bands now and labels now though that do talk about accountability processes that they're taking. I think that's part of it too. You know, being the call out post definitely did help a lot.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point because, you know, there's that where you were saying some of it's triggering, and to other survivors, you may go onto Twitter one day and all of a sudden your abuser is trending and that is triggering for you and you've never said anything. So it's like kind of a double-edged sword a little bit how that goes about, because people that came out also, I mean, for the most part during that time, I like to think, you know, with my little naive head, that support was there for most people coming out during that time. But there are those people that will get in and then try and bring you down and say that didn't happen to you and say horrible things. So other survivors will see that reaction and not want to come forward. Like, they don't want to be attacked online for coming out.
Yeah, it was unfortunate because I did receive so much hate. I have, prior to a lot of my organizing, I've been a sex worker for over 10 years, and I got into organizing with other sex workers and survivors of sexual assault and trafficking. And so a lot of people know that about me because I'm so out about it. And I like talking about it. And so there was a lot of people who were like, I called people out that didn't abuse me, but they abused like people in my community, and there was people in my DMs being like, "Oh, well, you're a whore anyway, so that couldn't have possibly happened to you." And I was like, "Well, I wasn't even saying it on behalf of me, but sure." And so at that point, I realized like how much flack it does actually receive, you know, and I offered to other people to be that person to anonymously post, call out posts. And, you know, that's a thing that I also encourage like labels and venues and event runners to do. If there's somebody who is able to handle some of the flack that comes back from that, and there's a repeat offender in your community, and you can be the anonymous voice for a survivor, please take that opportunity, because it's truly awful how people talk to me after this happened.
No, it's definitely like a mental toll when you try and take, especially that public of a stand. Like, I mean, we can go on and on about how toxic social media is. We all know it, but it's like, you know, a necessary evil at this day and age. So I think that's especially important because you also see, like anybody in our scene will know who I'm talking about that got called out anonymously on Twitter with all the allegations. And so people are like, well, you're lying because you're not saying who you are. It's like, well, why would they want to say who they are when you're sitting there saying everything that they're saying isn't true and like trying to destroy them? And it's like mentally, it's a lot to take on to even put your face to with those allegations to like do that. So
I would say though that it is like, because I've had a couple instances of anonymous call outs where it's then kind of impossible to know what the next steps are. So while survivors shouldn't have to be a public community knowledge thing, if there's any sort of steps that need to be taken, that survivor needs to have somebody like on behalf of them that can like be the face in communication with either like the band or the label, and those things can happen privately, and people need to understand that those things are going to happen privately. And you know, I've been totally on the keyboard warrior side and been like, fuck this person, fuck that person, over an anonymous call out post that was like barely anything, and then being like, okay, actually I was just really triggered and I now understand the reasonable response to this is maybe not fuck that person, but just a little more education and community care.
I think all of us need to like just kind of take a breath before we pull out the pitchforks sometimes. It's like, you know, just like a lot of this stuff can be triggering for so many of us, and like seeing it and you automatically, you know, like you said, get to that point where you're just like, I'm going to let all my anger out right now onto the internet. But it's like, you kind of got to view it and just see, do you want to add to this? Is that like the stance you want to take, is add to all this like negativity, or do you want to actually take steps to change it? Like do something that is like positive but also effective.
The kind of like cancellation of the internet reminds me of this really bad first date I had, where I decided that I was going to tell this man, you know, that I had PTSD from being a rape survivor and that I had been a sex worker before, and you know, all these things, because I was just experimenting with how soon I could tell somebody and like what that reaction would maybe be like. And he got so mad and he was like, give me a list of names and I'll go beat them up. And I'm just like, but you're not going to do that. Like, you're not going to go and do that. I could give you a list. Honestly, there's maybe one or two that I would want beat up, you know, like, but you're not going to go and do that. And it's such a red flag for me that you just immediately decide that that's what I would want anyway. And then I was like, you know, this is not going to work out. That immediate reaction was like, you're not listening to me. You just got so angry that something happened that you're going to go randomly punch somebody. It's just such a violent, weird response. And I'm reminded of him a little bit every time I read like fuck you, get this person off the stage. Like, you're not gonna physically ever tear this person off the stage, so why even like I don't know, whatever.
I think that's also like important for like no, it's okay. I just had this random thought also, because this comes up a lot in terms of like underage fans and what like responsibility do artists have, because you have some people that will come out with allegations and then it's like, well, they lied about their age and things like that. So it's like, I think artists should kind of draw a line with any fan and shouldn't be sleeping with fans or doing anything else with them, but that's just my opinion. I mean, especially when you're out on tour and stuff, that's not the way that the world goes in this scene. But kind of what responsibility do they take, or should they take in those stances? Because like, oh, are you gonna be like, check my ID? or
Right. Yeah, I also err on the side of, you know, when bands have fans, they have a power dynamic immediately already. And it's not that I don't think sexual relationships can't happen without power dynamics. I mean, we have sex all the time with people who hold power over us, and but one that should be acknowledged and like looked at, and like, does this person want to sleep with me because they're excited about me being in this band, or have we been having good chemistry all night, and then that's why we're having sex. And if that is the process, I am almost 1,000% certain you would figure out that somebody was a minor. Because I just don't think
because you're actually talking to them.
I know. I've never had a conversation with a minor where I was like, I don't know if they're a minor or not. Like, it's just, even with, as a 30-year-old now, like, even a conversation with a 21-year-old, I'm like, oh, you're baby. Like, there's just absolutely no way that if you're sitting there getting to know someone before you have sex with them, that you don't know.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I usually ask people their age all the time. I even asked you during this conversation. So,
right.
Just to kind of gauge, like, oh, are we kind of on the same wavelength of where we are in life or not?
Right.
that's just me. I don't know.
Right.
But so like and then, I mean, we've talked a lot about like the dynamics of bands with allegations, and in terms of fans on fan like harm is also an important thing that you guys deal with at festivals and at venues, because when you're in the crowd, when you're in the pit, when you're doing all these things like where you're in close quarters with other people, I think it's important to know where your hands are and what you're doing and things like that. So I think that's also another side of all of this in the music scene, is fans being responsible. And I mean, I've been to shows where fans will start, like, you kind of see like a little commotion going on. You're like, what's going on? And you see that someone was calling someone else out in that situation of harming someone. But, it's not always just the power dynamic of a band member with a fan. Sometimes the fans themselves need to be put into check. So how do we, I know like obviously the venue staff, which you guys do your training on, but what can we as fans at shows do to be on alert? Or if we see something, how do we approach that? Who do we talk to, to make it, like I said, not a more volatile situation than it is as well?
Yeah. I am hoping that I can get some get like a zine up of some information on this, because our training for venue staff is just so important for everyone. We have a section on what Maggie put together with a activist named Shauna Potter, an organizer in the punk scene, about bystander intervention and what that looks like. And I think that while a huge, huge aspect of this is community follow-up and community care, but in those moments in festivals and concerts, again, super important to directly call those things out, right? Even if there is not a lot of support in that direct call out, I think that it's still a good enough seed in people's brains for like, maybe that wasn't right. And again, there's a lot of different aspects in looking out for that. We don't want to turn into police with each other, but I do think that, like, if you see somebody touching somebody and they look like that they're too messed up to consent to certain type of touching, maybe call that out directly, or even ask the person who's too fucked up if they're okay, if they want some water, if they want to hang out with you for a second. Also recognizing your identity in approaching somebody like that. So, like, if you're a white person approaching a black or brown person, they might not feel safe walking away with you, but maybe you can intervene in a different way. And if you don't feel safe at all in calling something directly out, or if it feels a little more confusing, it's also okay to just wait and after an incident and check in with the victim, or if they are a victim, that's again victim decided. So being able to have a conversation with them afterwards between like songs or whatever, just being on the lookout for people around you and checking facial and social cues of, does this look appropriate? Should I say something? And do say something. I think that's really all that it's taking, is that we're just so uncomfortable with directly calling these things out. And that's really all that it takes. Publicly shaming somebody for groping somebody else immediately makes them stop, like almost every time. Like, it's not a, I don't know. It can be a hard thing to do depending on like how safe you feel doing it, but it's not like a complicated answer. Like, that's just what it is. If you call somebody out, and if they keep doing it too, and if you keep calling them out, they eventually like people are gonna either get like back you up, or at least that survivor knows that they could have had more autonomy, or that person who's offending knows that they're being watched.
Yeah. No, that's important. So, well, I think this was a good conversation on, a lot of things going on in the scene, and it's going to be a continued conversation. It needs to be, and I think hopefully some listeners get some stuff out of this. We'll provide resources. I know for Revival, we have our collab T-shirt with our Music My Body that proceeds go to Resilience, which is like the mother organization of the campaign. And we have a link that has resources in our social media bios on our link tree for survivors and people in the music scene and whatnot. There's a decent amount. Nina had given me a whole list, so they're good resources. If anybody is looking for those, you can find them on our social media, and I'll repost them too with this on our podcast socials. But yeah, I think, it's just this topic. I'd like to think of a day where you don't have to discuss sexual violence. It's gone, but that's in a crazy idealistic world, and it's just something that we're going to have to keep bringing up. But the more open we are with it, I think hopefully it will see change. Hopefully.
I think
we can hope. At least, hopefully with some people they change their ways and get it together. But so yeah, look out for each other at shows. That's the important part. And if you ever feel unsafe at shows, go find a venue staff that will hopefully be well trained in these situations, which is our hope. That I know with one of our conversations with Nina previously, is that's like a definite goal, is that venues just understand how to help if someone does come to them and need that support, so, and what to do from there. So well, thank you so much for joining us, Leaf.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know if Hayley had any more, or if Leaf had any more questions. I know I was wrapping it up, so.
No, you're good. I didn't have any other questions. I appreciate you jumping on, Leaf, and talking to us about it, because like Courtney said, it is an important topic, and it's something that obviously we've talked about that some people are uncomfortable with, and it needs to be discussed more. We need to bring people to the table to have these conversations with. Yeah. So I appreciate your time and your knowledge, and helping us share that with the fans.
Yeah. And I know, because I had met Maggie at Riot Fest because they had a tent. Do you guys have any festivals or anywhere you're going to be posted up at?
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully we're still doing Riot Fest and Lollapalooza. We're definitely doing Rodeo Fest. We're going to be at King Gizzard at the Salt Shed in a week. And yeah, we're looking for more volunteers because we are also offering more supplies such as fentanyl test strips and Narcan. So we need kit packing days and people to lug a little bit more supplies. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, and people can find that info if they want to volunteer on the website.
Yeah, on our social media or on our website. Yep, ourmusicmybody.org or at ourmusicmybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully, if anybody has any specific questions or are looking for even more resources than we provided, just let us know in the comments and we'll try and help any way we can. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for episode 11. Although I low-key feel like it's 12. Is it really 11? I feel like I might have labeled it wrong. You know, like I do on socials sometimes, and I number them wrong. So just yeah, it's okay. My brain doesn't always work, as we know. So, but yeah. So it's just me and Hayley for Song of the Week. Sad.
Yes. No,
That's
it's not
okay.
sad. We can. It's still a great little thing that in the episode with.
Yeah, I know. I forgot to have Leaf do one, so that's our problem. But that's okay.
That's okay.
That's okay. Oh, well.
That's okay.
Next time.
Yeah. I'll go first, I guess. My song of the week is going to be You Are Not by Young Guns. They were a UK band that came out, I believe, in like 2011, 2012. That the song is on the album Bones, which was back when it came out. I just loved it. I listened to it on repeat. It was just one of those albums that I really liked, and I've rediscovered it over like the past couple of weeks. And so I thought that You Are Not, it's a good song for this this segment, this podcast.
Awesome.
I mean, should I say bring it home, Courtney? I mean, we always end on bring it home.
I got you. And a little ode to E, the Bring It Home E, because she's the one that sent me the song yesterday. So If I Die Young Part 2, obviously most of us know the first one was by the band Perry. This one was just put out by Kimberly Perry, so I don't know. We were like talking about it yesterday.
That has to be the same, right?
Yeah. She's the singer, but we were talking about it yesterday because E sent it to me, and I was like, "That's weird. That is just like by her." And this one came out May 5th, and then they put out under the band Perry an acoustic version of the original one a week later, after this was released. So I'm not really sure. I'm gonna have to look into what's into that. That's strange.
But that was that was such a big song when it came out. Like, you couldn't escape it on the radio.
Yeah,
you could.
Yeah. So this is part 2 that got released at the beginning of the month. I don't know how we missed that.
We miss a lot of there's so much new music all the time. Like, how can we keep up with it? You know?
Yeah. So yeah, that's my song of the week. I'm gonna have to look why that's. I mean, they must not be a band anymore, but it's just really interesting that the acoustic version got released under them a week after this song. So it's interesting. So I'm gonna have to see what that is. But so just 2 songs added this week. But yeah, and then we're taking a break from recording, but you guys won't really notice the break because we keep it going for you guys. But yeah, so hopefully we'll have we already have some ideas for some good upcoming topics, and hopefully have some more great guests to join us in future upcoming episodes that we're excited about. And honestly, just leave us some comments. Let us know what you want to be hearing on the podcast. Give us some ideas on what you care about, because these are topics we think you'd find interesting. But if there's something you want to know, let us know.
Or a guest, if you have guests in mind that you'd like to see on it. We'd love to bring on every single guest.
Yeah. I mean, we can try and get him. Shoot for the stars. Honestly, shoot for the stars. We'll find some connection to get some people on here, you know? But, all right. Well, thank you so much, Hayley. Leaf's already left us.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on this week, Hayley.
Thank you for hosting, Courtney.
And we'll see you next time on episode 12 or 13, whatever it may be. It might be one or the other.
We're just going to keep it, we're going to mystery. It's a mystery to all of us.
I feel like it's actually 12. Wasn't 10 the emo night one? I don't know. I'm going to have to go look now. It's going to bother me. We just have to roll with the bad brain times that Courtney always has. Me. But thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the You, Me, and the Scene podcast. New episodes are released every other Monday.